Hi there, welcome to episode one of a new series that we're calling Break Free from Proprietary. We're going to be looking at free and open source alternatives to the tools that you use every day to make comics. I suppose I better roll the credits. So why do a series about using non-proprietary software? Well, it's all thanks to Global Frequency Studios. Those guys are great. Uh, Garrett and Aaron, they do a really good weekly sort of stream called Chat in the Flatting. Although I always think of them as the Starsky and Hutch of indie comics. They're effortlessly cool, but I do have difficulty telling them apart sometimes. Is it Garrett and Aaron, or Aaron and Garrett? Okay. Anyway, um, in one episode of their stream, they were sort of bemoaning the fact that they were still having to use Adobe Creative Suite just so they could use Illustrator or Premiere, and they felt sort of trapped in that they were paying effectively a monthly license for this stuff. So that got me thinking: why shouldn't we break away from proprietary software? What's to stop us from just using whatever software we want? And the term I keep hearing bandied about is industry standard. And what does that even mean? I mean, think about it. The industry has decided that a piece of software originally designed to edit photographs is the perfect tool for creating comics. But why? I suppose the big feature of Photoshop is that it handles CYMK colour profiles really well. And let's not forget, until the early 90s, there was no Photoshop. So what was the industry standard then? Well, it was paper and pencils, ink, duotone, things like this. What I'm saying is, the term industry standard is kind of misleading. It sort of brings into mind something that's been done the same way since time immemorial. It's an unshifting piece of software. We've always done it this way. It's the industry standard. But the reality is that industry adds to what it needs. So now Click Paint Studio is rapidly becoming another piece of software that is described as industry standard. So if that's the case, and the industry standard is constantly changing and evolving, why are we still shackling ourselves to big companies like Adobe? I think it's because Adobe represents consistency. They've been releasing Photoshop for over 30 years now. I mean, we use the term Photoshop as a verb, like you would to Hoover. It's become the name of a process, not just the software. Well, in recent years, Adobe have introduced a subscription model for all their software. And this sounds like a great idea. It's a similar sort of approach to sort of streaming platforms like Netflix or Hulu. You pay a small monthly subscription, you get what you want, plus some extra stuff like, Premiere or After Effects and things like this. But consider the following scenarios. They can change the price. They can just make it more expensive to use Photoshop. They can change the minimum specs needed to run the software, which forces you into upgrading or purchasing new hardware. They can change the structure of the file format, making it harder to read legacy files. You may have to, and I don't know because I don't have Adobe Creative Suite, but you may have to have or maintain some kind of internet connection to verify the license files, which, if you don't want to use the internet all the time, it's kind of a problem. And if you don't have access to the internet, it means you can't use Photoshop, potentially. And the biggest problem is, they can just one day decide that no one uses Photoshop and stop it altogether. I mean, this is the problem you get with streaming platforms, actually. How many times you put off watching that film on Netflix or Hulu or whatever, logged in the next day only to find it had been taken off the platform the day before? Well, this series we're going to look into alternatives to big software packages like Adobe and find tools that are free and, if possible, open source. So first up, we need to get some definitions. We need to talk about what free actually means. In terms of software, there are two definitions of free. You can have free as in beer or free as in speech, or, if you will, gratis versus free. So gratis is something that's given away for no monetary cost. This is a free beer. You walk into a bar, someone hands you a beer. They didn't ask for any money for you, and it doesn't cost you anything to drink it. And you can look at the ingredients, and you can see where it's brewed, but the brewer isn't going to give you the recipe or the plans to build your own barrels or how his brewery is laid out. You just get access to the free beer. On the other hand, Libre, or free, is completely open. You can do whatever you like with it. If you want to add new code to the code base, you can. If you want to write an importer for a specific format, you can. You want to write tools that bolt onto the software, you can. So there's a distinction in free software. Whilst free software won't cost you anything, not all software is free, and not all free software is necessarily free. That sounds confusing, but hopefully it might become clearer. So what are our priorities in finding new software? Well, first, it has to be free, as in it will cost you nothing. 2, it should ideally be free, as in open source, so that you can sort of extend the code base if you want, or get other people to write software for you, like plugins or utilities for it. It should be cross-platform, and you should be able to migrate your data. Okay, so this is the first episode. Let's start small and work upwards, shall we? So this first episode, we're going to look into alternatives to Microsoft Word, because if you're writing a script, chances are you're probably using Microsoft Word. So first up, let's take a look at Apache OpenOffice. Now this is an open source version of Microsoft Works, which contains obviously a word processor, a spreadsheet, database, presentation tool that's kind of similar to PowerPoint, and a simple graphics program and some other tools designed around databases. Now there's versions for Mac, Windows, Linux and Android, and it updates infrequently. Whilst it's a good start, the lack of a regular update and the seemingly small development team means that this software is constantly being rumoured to be discontinued. Next up, we have the plucky upstart of OpenOffice. It's Libre Office. This is forked from OpenOffice back in 2010, and it too offers a word processor, spreadsheet, presentation program, vector drawing tool, and applications for databases. In contrast to OpenOffice, LibreOffice has a regular release schedule every 6 months. There's also an online version of the suite, so if you can access it via a web browser, you should be able to use it on other machines that it's not ported for, though there are versions for Mac, Windows, Linux, Android and Chromebook. Next up we have Etherpad, which is a collaborative writing tool. It means that multiple users can write on the same document at the same time. Now for this to work, the document has to be stored on the server, and according to the documentation you can make your own server, although it also recommends using a third-party server that other people set up, and this is for me a red flag. There's no reassurance that a third-party server could be accessing or your documents. So any kind of script that's sensitive. So if you're writing the next Marvel DC crossover, you probably don't want to trust it to a third-party server, especially a third-party server with no credentials. And also, fundamentally, it's a really difficult piece of software to install. I tried installing both the Windows and Linux versions, and whilst the Windows one seemed a bit more straightforward, the Linux one was just an exercise in absolute torture. I use Linux, but I'm not a Linux user, if that makes any sense. I want software that's easy to install, and maybe we should add this to the list. In fact, let's add it to the list right now. So on the basis this is difficult to install, that I've got security concerns about where servers are being stored, I cannot with a clear conscience recommend this piece of software. I would say steer clear. The jury's still out on this one. And finally, we have the program that I use to write scripts. In fact, the script for this video was written on it, and that's Google Docs. I know what you're going to say. It's not open source and it is cloud based, but there are big advantages for me to use OpenOffice. The big one is I can decide who collaborates with it. So, like Etherpad, I can have people edit the same document in real time. It's free, as in beer, but there's no financial outlay required to write the script. Secondly, I can share this document with other writers, other collaborators, and only those people can collaborate on that document. So there's some security there in terms of just not getting any passing Tom, Dick or Harry write down things on my script. And thirdly, Google Docs has a version control system, so you can have multiple versions of the same file in the same file, right? So I'm sure we've all done this with illustrations. We've had a file that we've called final, and then we called something else final, and then you end up with a file called final, last one honest.psd, and in that directory you'll have all these particular files. Version control removes that. You just have one file that has a history that you can navigate and see the different changes to that document. Now, this does mean that Google Docs are stored on a cloud, and at the start of the video I gave you the streaming service example of a problem with cloud storage. Well, to combat this, I have offline backups of my scripts and all of my content on those drives. So should Google ever go down or accidentally delete my cloud storage, I've still got the latest versions of all the work stored there. So ultimately, the question you need to ask yourself is, well, what software do I use? Well, that's kind of up to you. All this video is doing is showing you some examples. There are a few which I think have more cons, and that would be Apache, OpenOffice and Etherpad. I think there's far too many questions about security, especially with Etherpad. But the others do have some kind of procedure in place to allow for that. So I would suggest, if you've got 5 minutes, download OpenOffice or try a Google Doc and see what you think. So next episode we're going to be looking at art packages and see if we can find something that can do the job of Photoshop. So join me then. If you like this content, you find it interesting, informative, then like, comment, share and subscribe. Don't forget to rock that bell for notifications, and we'll see you next time. Okay, bye now.